considered by many to be the Naomi Girma of men's ice hockey from the 1990s. No, Nick Lidstrom was like the greatest.
What's the term? Stay-at-home defenseman?
Yeah, Nick Lidstrom would not be a stay-at-home defenseman. He'd be a more transitional defenseman. He's a great assist man. He just kind of never got beat for anything. Maybe more the Sam Staub. It's very sad. Hello, and welcome to Expected Own Goals, Transfers, Summer, Dog Days, League Coming Back Soon edition. I really overdid that one.
Nailed it. 10 out of 10. No notes.
I'm going to redo that one if you'd like.
Whatever you want, buddy.
No, let's keep that. We're back talking about league soccer. Honestly, my league soccer brain feels like a little, I don't know, fatigued. It feels like we've been in an international soccer K-hole, and I'm just sort of like woozily coming out of it.
Totally.
But there has been a lot of movement this summer.
So much movement that just has occurred today when we're recording this on Monday.
Yeah, you had to break to me the Jalen Howell, Bethany Balcer trade.
I did.
Because I've been busy moving my parents out of their old house and into their new house.
Yeah, no, I mean, tons of activity during the tournament. We haven't really talked about Katie Zellum's move to Angel City, Jess Carter going to Gotham, Carson Pickett moving to Orlando to be closer to home. Yeah,
breaketh the brain. Yep.
Yeah, that's just scratching the surface.
No, I'm ready to get back to actual like league soccer and see what's about to happen. You pitch to me what you think the biggest transfer of this summer is, and then I'll hit back with what I think is a bigger one. Or a big one as well.
I think we also just haven't fully processed the Bethany Balcer, Jalen Howell move today, which, you know, again, just happened today. But I think if I'm going with my gut, I think the biggest impact signing is Delphine Cascarino to San Diego.
We wouldn't have made it past my second one with that in terms of its scope and size.
Yeah.
Why is this such a big transfer to you?
You got to weigh multiple factors here. It's A, the quality of the player, B, the age and the contract length of the player, C, who that player is competing for a spot against, and D, how much more value they are going to raise in an area of need for that team. Delphine Cascarino is a 27-year-old winger that they have signed through the end of 2026 with a mutual option for 2027, who is replacing most likely Mackenzie Doniak in a squad that is desperate for goals and desperate for final third and penalty box creation. And Cascarino fits that profile to a T, though she lost basically all of 23-24 because of an ACL tear. She came back in the spring and got minutes with Lyon, substantial minutes against good teams, was good at the Olympics for France. So there's no reason to believe that she has lost any of the effect that she has on a squad. And she's now locked up long term. This is a signing you can build around, given the age and the contract length. So I think this is a major, major impact signing for San Diego.
Yeah, I agree with you. There are some caveats I'd say with this. First off, the situation in San Diego is an absolute clusterfuck tire fire.
Sure.
But, and maybe you'll disagree with me, if there were a totally inexperienced coach who could look at a player's game and say, I know what that is, I think Landon Donovan and Delphine Cascarino are not the furthest apart in terms of philosophically how they approach the game, how they approach playing the wing, how they approach attack. They're both really proactive attackers. They both are happy to take players on. The situation in San Diego feels really dire to me on so many levels. And Delphine Cascarino, God bless her for coming into a situation that is as unbalanced as this. But if you're looking for somebody to let Jaden Shaw play in the middle more, if you're looking for somebody who adds a nice amount of depth, who might stand a chance of getting Alex Morgan on the end of stuff, and who's going to offer you two-way play, I think San Diego really, it's a broken clock is right twice a day. I think for all of the disaster going on in San Diego right now, this is something that if I'm a Wave supporter, I can feel genuinely good about.
It's
Now, my caveat here is we've talked about this a lot in relation to Corbin Albert. This is a tougher league than coming out of France. And Cascarino, who has put up good numbers in the Champions League, the NWSL just has a really steep learning curve, or a learning curve that, depending on your style of play, will or won't fit particularly well. I think Cascarino actually is probably built well to play in this league, but I think we probably won't see the best of Cascarino until next season.
I think that's fair. And I also think that anyone holding out hope that this is going to somehow get San Diego not only into the playoffs, but potentially into a championship game, maybe want to pump the brakes on that just because.
Yeah, not a magic bullet.
No, and also that wouldn't be Cascarino's fault, even if she had some betting in time to do, because the organization is in such shambles at the moment. Thank God that Jaden Shaw, Maria Sanchez, and Delphine Cascarino are there to at least.
I think the question marks out there for San Diego are just about what the upper end of their performance could look like this year and whether Delphine Cascarino moves the needle.
Yeah, she does. She absolutely does.
She does. For me, why this wasn't the most impactful transfer of the summer in my mind is because I just don't necessarily think this moves the needle on San Diego going from, maybe a borderline playoff team to a sure playoff team, because I'm not even sure it does that, because so many other things are.
The cluster of like 6th place to 12th place is so tight that Cascarino could be the difference between finishing in 9th and finishing in 8th.
If we're talking about the narrative of like why San Diego is a playoff team, I think Cascarino coming in and immediately fitting in and creating goals for what has been at times an anemic attack, that's absolutely going to be part of that story. I don't think San Diego makes the playoffs with a neutral or negative impact to Cascarino. So for me, what I think is actually the biggest transfer of the summer, and it's by no means like the most glamorous or glitzy, is Carson Pickett to Orlando, which just feels like the last piece that Orlando needs to really solidify their position as the best team in the league.
I mean, it's a Galactico signing in a way, a team that's already incredibly dominant in so many areas, just took the best left back in the league and got her for a song because she just wanted to come home. She's from Central Florida. Like that's incredible business. It's house money for Orlando because without her, they're probably winning the Shield or at least coming in second and playing multiple home games in the playoffs. With her, she turns 31 in September, but she's only signed through the end of next year. So your risk is low in terms of like how much that contract eats up your budget. This is the one place where maybe I wouldn't have necessarily said it was the biggest impact because this team is so good even without her. I know what this does is this just like minimizes that extra level of risk to you not being dominant, A, through the rest of the season and B, into the playoffs. So that maybe just takes the shine off of it just a little bit for me. But I think that's just also a matter of subjective point of view. What do you value more and how you value these kinds of things?
This is Orlando, a team who have, by every metric we look at, been the best or second best team in the league this year, adding a piece that not only I think unlocks potential in their attack, I think this frees up Adriana to do a lot of really interesting things for them. I think this only gives Barbara Banda yet greater service. Like I think it's just so you've got arguably the best creative fullback in the league being able to now serve the best forward in the world. It's a really savage move, and rarely do you get that statement without losing anything on defense. I think Seb Hines gives up nothing tactically to make his team better.
This is maybe my one concern, and maybe this is grasping at straws, but Carriabello does not seem to be a player that Hines has any interest in dropping. Carriabello is extremely left-footed. Hines, I think, in order to maximize Adriana's width, is going to want to keep a fullback wide on the overlap. And therefore, if you put Brianna Martinez on the bench and kick a Bello over to the other side or move Pickett over to the right, either way, all of a sudden you have an inverted fullback. And how much does that narrow your attacking shape. It's something to think about. The easy fix is to just bench Abello. And actually, the data kind of backs that up. Like Abello's net G plus above positional average per 96 minutes so far this season is negative. But Abello seems to be really rated and maybe more importantly trusted by Hines. So how do you fit that puzzle piece together? Obviously, you don't bench Pickett. No one would do that. But what do you do about Abello? I think the tough decision to make based on performance would be to say, well, you're a sub now, Carey, because we also don't really have room for you in the midfield where you played last year. Or do you try an inverter? I don't know. I keep that in the back of my mind of how you try to balance both your attacking and your defending width, given the personnel involved.
It's funny because it hadn't occurred to me that you wouldn't bench Abello, just because this in every way feels like an obvious upgrade to a position where you had room to upgrade. And I like the idea of having Abello as a depth piece, both on the wing and in the midfield. That said, the idea of inverting Carson Pickett, I'm on the record pretty much against the inverted fullback, except in the hands of like your Pep Guardiolas and your Jurgen Klopps, just because I think it's a really hard thing to do. And I think it takes a kind of freakish style profile player to make it work, which is why I've never been a big fan of it when Emily Fox has been deployed for the US that way. That said, I actually think Carson Pickett is like bordering on that freakish style of player where one could invert, because she is so good in creation and distribution that I feel like whether it was coming from the flank or whether it was new passing lanes existing through the midfield, she'd kind of find a way. Her entire career is kind of that story anyway. So it hadn't occurred to me that that would be something that Hines might be considering, just because I think Pickett is clearly an upgrade.
Yeah.
That said, that's interesting room for experimentation for a team that frankly probably does have a little cushion to experiment. They are going to be a playoff team. The final is going to be in Kansas City, so winning the Shield only matters so much if you're Orlando.
Right.
And they have an interesting points cushion. I think that Hines, who has proved himself to be pretty decisive about the way he wants his team to play and has spent his time building the team in his image, I think it's unlikely to see Carson Pickett inverted. But if there were room for experimentation on an already good team, I don't hate it. I'd see it for 2 or 3 games just to see what happens.
I mean, she's never played on the right side before.
No, totally. And it's a little late. Typically, you start seeing inverted fullbacks earlier in their career. She'll be 31 in September. I think this is a win now move, taking a fullback with not a lot of time left, low impact long-term contract, and trying to seize a championship window that you have.
If a player of this caliber is available, you go get her. The problem that I'm highlighting is a problem that Hines is actually probably really excited to try and figure out. It's something to note as the regular season progresses.
Yeah, I also think that Carson Pickett makes a really good wing sub when you're trying to protect a lead. Or Carey Abello makes a really good, you push Carson Pickett forward and you bring on Abello. Like, I like this as game state options as well.
Yeah.
I just have like kind of no notes for this move because it feels like such a slam dunk. There are other players who we're discussing here, Cascarino among them, who we might say are better pieces long term. As far as your impact, improving your 11 this season, I'm not sure a player is entering the league that is a better player this season than Carson Pickett.
You're not wrong.
What's your next big one?
It's a dual signing, and we've talked about them in the past, so we don't have to belabor it, but Ludmila and Julia Grosso to Chicago, because Chicago is a team that legitimately is in the playoff hunt, and they desperately need upgrades, both up front and in central midfield. Man, you couldn't do much better, given who was available on the market, than Grosso and Ludmila. So that, I think, is going to really change the complexion of what Chicago's season can look like. Ludmila's a little bit older, but it's basically a 2.5-year deal. Grosso is a 2.5-year deal while being in her mid-20s. And you could very easily see Karen Litzo and Richard Feu pushing for an extension for her and her being open to that since she's Canadian. These two signings have the potential to guarantee Chicago a playoff place. Whereas I don't
Yeah.
think either you or I would have said it was guaranteed for that team before.
Yeah, I think the upside for both of these players going to Chicago for Chicago's fortune is high. I'm going to call you cheater because that's a twofer.
Sure.
You just,
but I
you
do
just
think
play
they
a little-
work in tandem when we talk about what Chicago is.
But I accept it because it actually shows me a strategic vision. First off, I think both of these players take some of the attacking burden off Mal Swanson, which, given her own Olympic output, I think is necessary.
Yeah.
Grosso didn't feature as much for Canada as I would have liked. That said, I felt she looked good when she did. Her numbers out of Italy are strong. There is everything to feel good about a 24-year-old attacking midfielder, creative force going into that Chicago team, especially because what she's replacing, particularly in Bianchi, just ain't great.
Yeah.
There was a lot of room to improve that team.
Yeah.
Ludmila, I think, gives a completely new look to aspects of that attack. And again, it's like, how many minutes are you going to get out of her? But if Ludmila is just rotation depth attacking, they just got a ton better. I think this just helps Chicago maximize quality minutes in attack on the field at all times.
Sure.
I think that if you were looking for the Ricketts era to send signals that Chicago is serious about winning, both of these moves are moves that a team that is serious about winning makes.
I mean, Grosso fills a need offensively and defensively. Like, the midfield was the most desperate area for Chicago to address. But then Ludmila is an attacker who fits the way Lauren Donaldson wants to play so well, being such a high tempo, aggressive, transitional number 9 that I think the kinds of service that she can latch onto, the way that she can interplay with Swanson, just fits Chicago's style to a T.
Mal Swanson, and I think I said this during maybe our Olympics final broadcast, but like, Mal Swanson had to be looking across the field and going, the plus side is I do get to play with him. Like, is there some sort of transition adjustment to the NWSL likely for both players? Yeah, I think both are tempered by different things, both being from Western Hemisphere countries with lots of NWSL players. I think that at least exposure to the way the league is run and played is higher. I think if you grew up playing in the Canadian system, you're quite familiar with what to expect in NWSL league play.
Yeah.
I think that Ludmila is more than athletic enough to boss around defenders in this league. My hesitations that might exist for other players that we're going to discuss in this pod don't exist quite in the same way for these two. I don't necessarily think this quite has the oomph necessarily to get Chicago over the top. But again, if we're talking about narratives and Chicago ends up as a 5 or a 6 seed going into these playoffs, we'll be talking about the impact of Julia Grosso and Ludmila on this team this season. Because those are pieces that I think take a pretty idiosyncratic tactical team and help them find goals pretty directly. In the play, which is what they are going to do and what they are going to continue doing.
All right. Who's your next one?
I think I'm going to stay on my train of talking about players that I think give your team a really, really good chance to win the league this year. And so maybe I'm going to talk about 2 transfers here. One where I think the player's reputation and the team that they're going into, where I think people might assume this will go better than I think it will go. The first being Jess Carter to Gotham. And the second being Alana Cook to Kansas City, where I think this is the kind of piece that a team who would like to win a title adds and could potentially be decisive. I suspect that we will find points of disagreement on both of these. I think Jess Carter to Gotham on paper is a big deal. I don't think there's a lot around that.
Yeah.
Everything that we know about Jess Carter as a player, I think will fit nicely in a Juan Carlos Amaro system. I'm curious to see Jess Carter deal with the athleticism of this league and hop into a team this late in the season with this many pieces that are already established. So I have hesitation here. Where are you at?
I find it interesting that you think that she might struggle with the physicality of the league. I don't think she's going to have a problem with that at all. I mean,
she's a very physical player. I think more the speed is what I'm getting at.
Maybe. Sure. I mean, it's a funny one because this move exists because she is on Katrin Berger's partner. you know, like
Yeah.
that's why she's there. Thankfully, she's a young, in her prime, high quality defender who they could lock up for 2.5 years. So that's beneficial. I think she provides cover at a lot of different positions. Sam Hyatt's had some struggles. Maitane has not been able to get healthy. Amoros no longer seems to trust Bruninha. And Jess Carter can play either center back role, and she can play as a fullback. So if you need right back cover, she can do that. If you need center back cover, she can do that. There have been a lot of players coming in and out of that back line, either through managerial choice or through injury. So this feels like a player of quality that helps give Amoros cover at some pretty necessary places.
It's a Galactico signing for sure.
Yeah, I think it has a lot of value, and she scored against Chelsea today in a friendly, which is funny. I can understand where you worry about the pace of play, but I don't know. That doesn't seem to jump out as a primary issue when, a player like Emily Sonnet is either playing next to you or in front of you, who can do a lot of that aggressive defending. Same thing with Jenna Neiswanger, I think, and with Tierna Davidson for that matter. So there are areas where if she can't keep up, there's cover. And she's so tactically flexible, not just in her positioning, but also in what kind of system she plays in. She can play in a back three. She can play in a back four. She can play on either side of the field. Like, that just has a lot of value, especially when, you played in a World Cup final with England last year and you've won a ton of trophies with Chelsea. That feels smart, and it feels like Amoros and the team over there covering their ass. That's where they've had consistency issues in terms of personnel.
What I think, though, is interesting is, despite all of the consistency issues in terms of personnel that they've had, Gotham remains one of the best 3 defenses in the league.
Well, it's kind of like, how do you slice it? If you're looking by, total XG allowed, there's been nobody better. But when you look at, on a per shot level, they're, the XG per shot that they're giving up is they're 9th in the league. Which kind of tells you that maybe they need some solidity to prevent counterattacks. And like, Carter's got a lot of familiarity doing that.
Yeah, I think you've actually keyed in on where systemically as a defense, I actually think they don't need Jess Carter. And as far as what an individual defender can do against elite attackers, I am not totally sold on the idea of Jess Carter against the best of the best. And I think I'm getting at when we get to the playoffs. That said, all of your points about the current uncertainty in how Amoros wants to line up, we're going to see a lot of Jess Carter. No question. Down the stretch. Whether Jess Carter is a perfect piece going to Gotham, this is a team I've rated highly all season. And maybe I think the best case scenario for Jess Carter's impact doesn't get you a much higher floor than what their current defenders already have created. I take your point about the shot quality that Gotham is giving up, but I don't know if Jess Carter answers that question.
Well, I don't know. I think maybe you're more convinced about her risking getting beaten for pace than I am. I can believe that it would happen, but I think I need to see it first.
Yeah, and totally. So while I think, again, this is one of those, like, if your team can add a Jess Carter, yeah, go ahead and add a Jess Carter. Gotham benefits from that itself. Jess Carter in the NWSL throws some question marks up for me that you don't seem to have. I don't think this is a bad signing by any means, but it's one that I suspect everyone is very high on, and I have reservations about, just in terms of its overall impact. Not that I don't think if I'm Gotham, I'm making this move. Obviously, if a Jess Carter falls in your lap, you take it. And I'm giving Amoros a player that, who knows? I could be eating my hat and we could be talking about, like, the top 3 defender in the NWSL come the end of the season. And the piece that pushes this Gotham team who we both picked to win this league, over the top. That
Yeah.
absolutely could happen. I'm just like less sold on the clean fit, kind of like the one I see in Orlando with Carson Pickett, than I am with this is the cleanest fit. It's been a minute since I've watched Gotham play, and everything that you're saying here is true.
Yeah.
All right, let's move and talk the flip side defender, somebody who's not gotten a lot of time this season, Alana Cook, running down her deal and going to Kansas City to join Vlatko, a coach who rates her.
Yeah, I mean, she's played 1,000 minutes. Like, she's been a regular everyday player in Seattle. She's missed some time because of injury, but otherwise she's been a first choice center back. But she's had a really terrible year. And I think the only reason that she's in Kansas City right now is it's a short-term deal. It's, she's a free agent in this offseason, and Kansas City is desperate for a center back because Elizabeth Ball is hurt. Gabby Robinson's out for the rest of the year. They don't have a lot of cover at that position. And so they need Cook.
So hence why I love this move. I think this is a player who is coming from a terrible situation, who longer term, I think we both are very enthusiastic about what Alana Cook can provide you both defensively and as a progressive passer. That said, Kansas City has a need, and this fills that need really, really well.
I mean, if I have a worry, it's that like Cook has always been up and down in terms of how she defends dribblers 1v1, and she has been horrific defensively this year, like shockingly bad, both in terms of her on-ball and her off-ball defensive performance. And think about the way that Kansas City plays. They're incredibly high tempo, high pressure, counterattacking system that could potentially be caught out by a smart counterattacking offense. Does Cook get just completely skinned and have a couple of goals scored on Adriana Franch? It's not out of the realm of possibility here.
Totally real. Kansas City doesn't have better choices.
No, they don't. They really don't.
And I think that, yes, if we're going to game this out to the end, Alana Cook getting skinned alive by Barbara Banda and Kansas City losing a home final.
KC Orlando, middle of September, we're going to get a preview.
Yeah. If we're going to go even further, and just like Barbara Banda skins Alana Cook, scores a brace, and Orlando win the league in Kansas City in November. Yeah, no, I mean, does that waking nightmare for our Midwestern friends exist? Yeah, it definitely does. That said, I think a lot like the way Tierna Davidson in Chicago, we both kind of looked at those defensive numbers and said, poor system, not a bad player, a player dealing with a bunch of stuff outside their control, give them a clean slate. Yeah, I think Alana Cook we should evaluate on some level like that. She is also coming off being a defender for a kind of a very good Seattle Reign defense last season that found their way in the playoffs to stifle everyone. So I'm willing to forgive this Seattle season. Just I'd say it's so bad up in Seattle right now.
And we will get to some of the other reasons why that is the case.
Yeah, but I'm willing to say, like, Alana Cook, here's a mulligan for your Seattle Reign 2024 season. Now go enjoy Kansas City and a coach you can work with.
Yeah, I mean, totally fair. Again, Kansas City doesn't have a choice.
Yeah, that's
and it's low risk because it's it's 10 regular season games at this point.
Both of these center backs that we've just talked about, low risk acquisitions for teams who are very good and are essentially putting another arrow in their quiver to give themselves a chance to win the league this year.
Yeah.
All right, Evan, what do you got next? What do you want to talk?
I think I'm gonna go with Katie Zellum. We're now sort of in terms of like players who
she's really high profile.
She's really high profile. I mean, I think the asterisk I'm making for a lot of these picks is that we've talked a lot about Washington's signings because a couple of them came really early in the process back in the spring, and the other one we actually went in pretty in depth about before the Olympics. So putting the Washington situation aside, Zellum is interesting to me because she has never been Serena Wiegmann's first choice for central midfield with England. But you also like, okay, Kira Walsh and Georgia Stanway are ahead of her. So like, okay, fine, whatever. She's had to deal with one arm being tied behind her back for a lot of her recent career because she's at Manchester United.
And now she's at Angel City, so she'll be familiar with that experience.
What was so interesting was, with the usual small sample size caveats, like I isolated the versus good opposition thing between Zellum and Madison Hammond in some like key number 6 statistical categories like progressive passes, vertical passing yards you're generating, possession adjusted defensive numbers, and just looked at like how they did against good teams, and like they weren't actually that far apart, which was kind of surprising. And I also went back and I listened to our episode about the WSL with Jesse Parker Humphreys, and we talked a lot about how like Zellum's off the ball defensive work in the past year at Manchester United was pretty subpar, and that central channel was a place where a lot of their opposition feasted. And so I am wondering if Zellum is going to be the improvement that on paper it seems obvious she would be. I don't know, especially because like the other, like the intangible element, you've heard a lot about how like Zellum is apparently a great club captain and she's great in the locker room. Well, for whatever on-field issues we have with Madison Hammond, she has the same reputation at Angel City, that she's great in the room. So how much of an advantage are you really getting on those kind of soft skills with Zellum? All this to say, like, it feels weird to argue that she's not making Angel City better in central midfield, but also like you could have just kept Amandine Henry and figured out, done better business and not had to worry about like bringing Zellum in at all. So as it always is with Angel City, it's one step forward, 2 steps back.
Yeah, you got to the point that it was going to get to, which is to say you had a Katie Zellum months ago and you let her go because of bad financial planning.
Yeah. Older, but potentially a better Katie Zellum.
Yeah, correct. And now you have Katie Zellum, who I think the path forward here is potentially playing a double pivot and keeping both Hammond and Zellum on the pitch.
I think it's inevitable because you just don't have anybody else.
Yeah, I just don't. It's funny because you also have Rocky Rodriguez on this team. Like, Angel City is just so poorly constructed that like that like Katie Zellum, who I think is a little bit overhyped because of the pedigree of playing for Manchester United, who themselves are a little bit overhyped to a lot bit overhyped. I think Katie Zellum is like a good PR signing, and from a footballing perspective, I don't think moves the needle a ton necessarily for Angel City.
Yeah.
Angel City just has need in so many positions, and this was one of them. But this isn't the kind of like seismic improvement that was needed.
No, I mean, you just go.
That said, I do think it will make them like marginally better.
Yeah, but marginally isn't enough, I think, for given where they are right now, especially if they have any playoff ambitions in mind. Going back to the Rocky Rodriguez point, now that Clarice Lebion is gone, and they don't have anybody, literally anybody that they could even argue could play every day as a number 10, unless you are really, really ready to commit to Kennedy Fuller full-time. And if you're not ready to commit to Kennedy Fuller full-time, then Rocky's getting pushed up in an area of the field where she is not optimized for at this point in her career. So you have Rocky playing the 10 with Hammond as a double pivot with Zellum. Zellum's going to have to do a lot of covering for Hammond. And if Zellum's off the ball defending, as Jesse Parker Humphreys believed, is not up to scratch, that no problems have been solved here.
Yeah, no, I mean, Katie Zellum does not help you score more goals. It is up in the air whether she helps you prevent more goals from being scored. And that's the name of the game, guys.
Yeah.
So I think this is a pretty low impact move, even if it is one of the flashier names and flashier signings coming to this league this summer. Let's move on. No question in my mind, now that you've brought up Katie Zellum, that we should talk about today's news, which I'm still taking on board, and that is Jalen Howell to Seattle for Bethany Balcer, a move that I think makes very little sense for Louisville and even less sense for Seattle.
I definitely agree with you on the Seattle point. Little bit more mixed on the Louisville point, because
one of the things Bethany Balcer gives you something different.
And well, for one thing, the log jam in attack that Bev Yanez just has never seemed to be able to settle on has faded a little bit down the stretch. Like Emma Sears is not scoring or creating own chances for herself in the way that she was at the beginning of the year. Raylan Turner's not seeing the field as much as she probably should be. Yep. And it's the striker position that Balcer is there to address. She's not a winger. So like whatever problems exist on the wing for Louisville, namely in the form of Kayla Fisher and Alexa Barr, they're not going away, and Balcer doesn't fix it. But Balcer does, I think, give you an improvement over Turner, if only because of experience. Like their XG per 96 are pretty equal. I think Balcer's like 0.36, Turner's 0.4, but Balcer's got 5 more years of professional experience under her belt. So all things being equal, I'll go with Balcer. And I trust Balcer, especially now with a player like Savannah DeMello to work with, and without a player like Jordan Huitema creating a bunch of positional redundancy when they're both on the field, at least streamlines some of those central attacking areas for Louisville. So I don't hate that. I actually think that's a pretty smart thing. And also, you know, we've talked about it from the jump, from our season preview, about just how much positional redundancy exists in central midfield for Louisville. You know?
Yeah, that's the one. At the beginning of this season, we would have both called each other insane for saying Jalen Howell was the piece that needed to move. But this has not been a Jalen Howell season.
It's not been a Jalen Howell season. She's lost a lot of playing time, and not just because of injury. Well, you know, at the same time, Marissa DeGrande's had a pretty nice year, and Taylor Flint's had a great year. So,
I mean, Taylor Flint can be like rightfully aggrieved for not being on that Olympics team based on the season she's had, and should be in the mix in that U.S. women's national team midfield for years to come.
Yeah, I think
Taylor Flint has got her groove back in Louisville.
Yeah,
Jalen Howell at Jalen Howell's expense on some level.
Yeah, and DeGrande, while has not really offered you much going forward, has been perfectly fine defensively, and I think DeGrande paired in a double pivot with Flint, there's really no issue there. So Louisville's like main problem is like, where do you get wide passing now? I mean, like losing Carson Pickett is the problem for Louisville. It's not losing Jalen Howell and gaining Bethany Balcer, in my opinion.
Yeah, I agree.
It's Seattle that's like, what the fuck are you guys doing? Apparently you don't think you need to score goals, but you do need 8 number 6s and number 8s clogging up your midfields.
Okay, so in defense of Seattle's move, one that I do find totally head-scratching, we have known Laura Harvey has not been a Bethany Balcer person for a minute.
Yeah, or it's like, you know, she's getting, you know, Balcer has played a lot. It's just that Huitema and Balcer, their profiles are too similar for them to ever really be functional on this at the same time.
Yeah, and frankly, I prefer Balcer to Huitema.
Ditto.
I know you do.
Yeah.
But we were both sort of aghast down the stretch last year as Bethany Balcer got limited to no time in the playoffs in Seattle's run toward, you know, ultimately losing the title.
Mm-hmm.
We both were sort of shaking our heads wondering why Bethany Balcer wasn't a bigger piece of that. And I think we have to come to terms with the fact that, like, Laura Harvey just ain't a Bethany Balcer person.
I don't know if that's quite it. What's going on behind the scenes of this deal is that Balcer and Leslie Gallimore and Harvey talked about an extension in the offseason. last year.
Yeah.
And Balser stated quite plainly and transparently, to her credit, like she was thinking about making a change. She was thinking about wanting to find a different environment.
Hard to understand why she would feel that way given her playoff minutes. No, of course she was thinking about making a change.
Yeah, but also, I mean, like she's played 1,240 minutes this year. It's not like she's been parked by Harvey. Like she's been a central part of their attack. But she's been there for 5 or 6 years, depending on how you want to count 2020. So like maybe she just wanted a different kind of challenge and also all of the uncertainty at that time and throughout much of this year around what kind of player budget would be available just around the transition to ownership probably incentivized a lot of players whose contracts were winding down this year or next year to maybe think about different challenges. It's hard to blame her for that. She seems to be a little bit annoyed on social media right now because she ended up in Louisville rather than maybe someplace she would prefer to play. But I don't think it's necessarily that Harvey didn't want Balser. I think it might be a little bit more emphasized that Balser didn't want Harvey anymore.
6 1 half dozen the other on that statement.
Yeah.
I think that whatever we think of as far as Balser Harvey is not a marriage made in heaven as far as striker and coach is concerned.
But it was in 2022. You know,
Sure.
It was for long stretches of 2023. It's like, I don't think it's super clear cut that like their relationship has just completely degraded or they were just never a good match.
I think that I think Bev Giannis offers Bethany Balser a lifeline to get the best out of what she has, something that was not happening in Seattle anymore. A lot of that this season because Seattle's a train wreck.
Yeah. Yeah. And just to put numbers on it, like, I mean, Balser played 74% of the team's minutes this season. Like, she's averaging 71 minutes a game. Like, she is there. She is there and she is key. But it's just a positional logjam and a player who is like looking to try something different because you don't know what the ownership is going to spend and how they're going to treat the team as a going concern. So
totally. That said,
Howell there.
We're by the way, we're discussing the more sensible portion of this deal right now.
Yeah. It's Jalen Howell arriving.
Yeah, Jalen Howell, who is a very good, when healthy, defensive midfielder. I get from a talent acquisition perspective why Seattle makes this move. I get why Laura Harvey likes this player. As far as like squad management and depth is concerned, this is madness.
Yeah, because
Seattle has no ability to score goals right now.
Yep.
Balser or otherwise.
Mm-hmm.
And the one position that they are just like drunken sailors at is the 6.
Yeah. Jalen Howell's better than Olivia Vanderjagt. She is younger than Anghera James Turner. She is maybe a little bit redundant, but still on the level of Quinn. But why did you go and sign Anghera James Turner last year? That seems really fucking stupid now that you're just saddled with this 30-something number 6 when you have Quinn and Howell available to you. Fishlock's slowing down. Quinn and Howell are not progressive CMs. Maybe it would have been wiser to go get somebody who could pass between the thirds as redundancy for when Fishlock's career is eventually over.
I think to Laura Harvey's credit here, if you ever have the opportunity to dramatically improve at a position or like grab a player that you rate highly, I understand the argument in favor of Jalen Howell being better than everything you currently have at that position. And you'll just figure out how to deal with those extra component parts that weren't really working to begin with now that you have this better player. That said, this better result in Jalen Howell being in Seattle for like 5 years. This deal makes sense if you are able to revive a very good central midfielder and then lock that central midfielder into a contract for a period of time.
Neither Bev Yanez nor Ryan Dell communicated with Howell at all that this deal was going to happen because she, in the most diplomatic way possible, unloaded on social media by just saying this is completely shocking to her. So she cannot be happy about this. So Seattle's really going to have to show her something in order to keep her.
If you asked me what team I think is currently most out to sea in the NWSL, Seattle's going to be on that list.
Yeah.
And it's going to be pretty high on that list. Jalen Howell is a piece that if I'm a Seattle Reign supporter, I feel really good about. I like the profile. I think she does so many things well when healthy. I think she really can be a cornerstone for this team moving forward and might be the signing that is the first move in the right direction. At the cost of a very good Bethany Balser and at present looking like your team is chicken with its head cut off in terms of decision making.
Yeah.
The one good thing is that you got the better player in this deal, I think, all things considered, and that the long-term prospects of this player are very good. But yeah, lots of questions. I don't love Jalen Howell going and playing on, the clink turf for all things injuries concerned. That said, this deal is just like pretty baffling in terms of the log jams it creates immediately. Are either of these teams attempting to win this season? It sure felt like Louisville was giving it a go. I don't think this deal actually hurts their short-term prospects. I also think it's fair to say I think Seattle was really not giving it a go anymore. And I think that as a long-term move, this makes more sense than it does in its short term.
Yeah, I mean, I think Louisville should be thinking about a playoff spot. I mean, they're playing like a playoff team. It's just some results haven't gone their way.
So, like, I squint and I see the sense in both of this, but it presupposes that Louisville is saying, look, we might need a couple goals down the stretch to get us in that playoff spot. What the value of being a 7 seed is, I don't know. That said, Louisville is a franchise that really owes their fans a playoff berth and to just see what that looks like.
Yeah.
Seattle, on the other hand, Seattle's fans will give Laura Harvey quite the leash. We have heard that from every Seattle supporter we've spoken to.
Yeah.
And this move is definitely not a short-term move. This is a looking long-term kind of player acquisition. So again, like, I see the logic in both of this, but it is a head scratcher, like, when you look at it immediately. And I think this is Seattle saying, hey, we're out this season and it's going to get ugly. Yeah. And I feel like this is Louisville saying, look, we gave up a really good piece to try to be in this season.
Yeah.
And leaving both sets of fans probably pretty unsatisfied.
And we also, like, it's like the math problem at the beginning of Goodwill Hunting sometimes. The complications of trying to get a deal done in the NWSL. So we don't know if Gallimore and Harvey were maybe trying to go get an attacker to replace Balser, and this was the best that they could do. Very possible. We should give them a little bit of credit for that, but they don't walk away from this looking good in the short term. So you do hope that once everything is sort of bedded in with the Carlisle group, that Howell feels secure enough and taken care of enough that she's willing to sign a long-term extension and then solidify their central midfield in the long term. But that's the only way this deal comes out looking good for Seattle. Player we haven't really talked about is Ana Maria Chernogorchevich coming from Atletico Madrid. I'm sure Leslie Gallimore and Laura Harvey would be like, look, we got a goal scorer. We brought in an attacker, but you brought in a 33-year-old winger who had a very subpar season relative to her usual standards. And I don't see this as a long-term solution for the problem of being able to score goals.
The fountain of youth that Laura Harvey has in Seattle to rejuvenate 30-something-year-old talents and get absolutely everything out of them, that fountain has run dry this year. I don't think this moves the needle very much.
No. Not unfamiliar with the NWSL, having played for Portland back in the day. She was excellent in the time she had in her final season at Barcelona as a winger/fullback, and was pretty anonymous when she was on the field last year at Atleti. All right, you take Veronica Latsko and or Ziara King out of your lineup and you stick Chernogorchevich in. Does that really make you better? No.
Guys, I think just generally bad policy signing players at age 33 and expecting them to be high impact attackers.
Yeah, especially when you've got Chernogorchevich for a year and a half.
I don't know what you do in Seattle. What's next for you?
I think I want to talk about Jessica Silva.
Yeah, this is a question mark for me because I've just not watched enough Benfica, and I'm curious about how you feel this is going to translate.
There are very few players whose public discourse when she comes around, be it the Euros or the World Cup or when Benfica's in the Champions League, is so outsized relative to what she actually is as a player that I always marvel. Like, what do people see in Jessica Silva that makes them think that she's actually good? She's not good. She's a 29-year-old winger who has never, when she's played good teams, ever produced above average XG or XA. She was not good at the World Cup last season. She's not good when Benfica plays teams in the Champions League. She was a disaster when she played for the Current in 2021. And people, I think, probably at the time chalked that off to the craziness of they being an expansion team and the COVID season. And whatever. No matter how you slice or dice Jessica Silva, she's not a good player. And the only thing that I can think of that maybe justifies this for Gotham is that it's a short-term deal. It's just for the back end of the season, and it's covered an area where maybe they feel like they need depth because of Midge Purce's ACL injury. But my confusion is, like, why don't you trust Yasmin Ryan on that wing? What is Amaro seeing this year that makes him think that Ryan might not be the answer in the stretch run? Now, maybe Silva is going to be a bench piece, and that's it. Maybe she truly is bench depth, but we don't know that yet because we haven't seen how Amaros is going to deploy her. If that is the case, then fine. You get a player with international pedigree to cover a position where you have depth issues for 10 regular season games and a playoff run. Fine. You give her 15 minutes off the bench, whatever. But if she starts starting games, that feels stupid. That feels really stupid to me.
Yeah, this is another one of those where, like, Jess Carter is going to be expected to take starter minutes. I have no such expectation here for Silva.
Yeah.
I think this is why I said I sort of thought we were done with, like, what we were calling, like, major moves, is because this is not a major move. This feels like 20 minutes to give you a change of look from Yasmin Ryan. Frankly, I don't know how different from Yasmin Ryan you're really expecting, except just a drop off in all categories. But yeah, I think this is just, does this make Gotham worse? No, it doesn't, unless Amaros starting Silva, in which case, yes, this makes Gotham worse.
Yeah.
And that's not how you want to talk about a transfer. You don't want to talk about a transfer like, if this player gets minutes, woe be that team. I think we should circle back to two teams that we've talked a lot about. Let's start with Washington, who I think are about to get a lot better.
Well, this is interesting. So we talked about Rosebud Kouassi before the Olympic break, and we know where she is going to fit in the system. Saw a little taste of that when they played Arsenal in a friendly over the weekend, and she looked quite impressive as the left winger. We talked about Lacey Santos, who is the earliest of these signings because she signed all the way back in April. We have not talked much about Esme Morgan, who in limited time with Manchester City was, like, pretty impressive. It's a positional question of she can play either flank as a fullback. So who does Jonathan Heraldez prefer? Does he prefer Gabby Carl or does he prefer Casey Kruger with regard to Morgan? Or does Morgan, because she's only 23, start on the bench to begin this process and eventually work her way up to the 11?
Yeah, but that's the one for me.
Yeah, but she's signed through 2027. Like, she's the long-term play here. She's going to be one of those players along with Kouassi who you build around. So you don't necessarily have to think too hard about how she fits in for the 2024 issue. I want to talk about Santos, because Santos was signed because, going back to, like, how these deals work behind the scenes, you're talking to the player and their agents for weeks, sometimes months before the deal gets announced. Mm-hmm. So Santos gets announced in April before Atletico Madrid's season is over. That means that they had been talking to her for quite a while.
Probably 6 months. Approaching that.
What player plays Lacey Santos' position, and what player wasn't necessarily a player who you thought was going to become the potential face of your franchise? Croy Bethune.
No, again,
now it becomes a question of, like, how do you balance Santos and Bethune in the way that Giraldes is going to want to play? I put it to you.
I knew that this was coming. I think, again, this is one of those. 6 months ago, you and I on this podcast would have said, Croy Bethune, very promising. Lacey Santos, what a signing
Yep.
for Washington. I'm
Yes.
sure we said some version of that.
Yeah.
Wow, that's great. Lacey Santos makes all the sense in the world. This is a champagne problem.
Sure.
When it turns out you have the best, like a top 5, top 10 attacker in the league, just sort of come out of draft pick. And you still have Lacey Santos, who isn't any worse than we thought she is.
Mm-hmm.
I don't know. I choose the problem of figuring out how to get these players minutes. We've also seen Washington unafraid to dispatch players who have previously been efficient for them. Ashley Hatch, we're looking at you, in favor of something that suits and fits the system. Look, if Washington doesn't change anything down the stretch run and just uses Lacey Santos here and there, they're still a really big threat to win this whole thing. If they can find a way to deploy Lacey Santos in addition to their already high functioning attack, they're yet further on the road toward a title.
But then the question becomes, who do you drop? If you want to play Santos and Bethune together, who goes to the bench? Is it Hal Hirschfeld? I don't think Kwasi is droppable based on the talent that we know she has and the position that she needs to fill. Rodman's not droppable. Sarr is not droppable. Andy Sullivan, given the position she plays, is not droppable. And so then you have to figure out, how do you balance Hirschfeld, Bethune, and Santos in the system?
I think down the stretch, you're managing Croy Bethune's minutes in preparation for a playoff run, and who better to manage those minutes with than Lacey Santos? I think that this is kind of a non-problem for me. I think Trinity Rodman is in dire need of having some minutes spelled. And so if she were to just get the entire month of September off while you're betting in Lacey Santos, there are not, which is, I think, probably not outside Geraldo's own sense of flexibility.
So then you throw, Bethune on the right wing instead?
Yeah, possibly. Or Santos. You just have options. And the question of what is your best lineup is when you can kick down the road into October, November when you're in the playoffs. Have some fun, experiment. The baseline performance for this team is already really high. Make sure you're managing Trinity Rodman's minutes. Make sure you're not burning out Uli Matasar. None of these players should be seeing 90s. Give these players mix and match opportunities to play with each other and see if something doesn't emerge. This is the fun experimentation when you just have a good team. Also, Hal Hirschfeld played a lot of minutes. This is a long rookie season for her too. There are some minutes to be spelled there. I think you'll see Santos and Bethune on at the same time when Washington is forced to face breaking down low blocks. You just get that double creativity. I think as far as landing spots for very good players coming from Europe, this is a good one. There is time to bet in. There is time to get this right. I just feel really good about all of these moves for Washington. I guess I see Santos off the bench, spelling Bethune getting full weeks off, Kwasi spelling Rodman for full starts, and for stupid heavy travel, and making sure that Bethune and Rodman have really fresh legs for the playoffs. Look, if Santos or Kwasi are just instant game-breaking players and just explode onto this league, that's the best kind of problem. But if that doesn't happen, we're talking minute management. Let's talk Utah quickly.
I don't think we really need to say much here. I mean, they brought in a bunch of 30-somethings who are immediately going to go into the starting 11 because of the players they'd be replacing. Claudia Zornosa from Real Madrid, Chloe Lacasse from Arsenal, and Mina Tsanaka from Enoch Kobe Leonessa. These are longer-term deals than you would have thought, but that's probably what it required for Utah to be able to get these deals done.
Yeah, they're all the wrong side of 30.
Yeah,
it bothers me.
This makes the team better, but that doesn't mean much. They could improve with these signings and still finish 14th.
Yeah, also Mandy Hott could come off her heater, and everything that these players add can be lost in the wash. Because it's worth noting that Utah could be a lot worse than they are right now. And some regression is to be expected there. On an individual player by player basis, I think they're all fine players. I'm not over the moon about any of them. I do think we should talk about Courtney Vine North Carolina. I do think we should talk
Absolutely.
about Mackenzie Arnold to Portland. We don't have to talk very long about them.
Yeah, Arnold, we talked about. It's a stupid move. They've got too many goalkeepers. Arnold is no better than what they have.
They have let Emily Alvarado go.
Doesn't matter. They still have like 4 or 5
Yeah, no,
in the
it's not.
system.
Mackenzie Arnold, I think, is maybe marginally better than Shelby Hogan, which is not the upgrade that Portland needed.
Arnold had a bad Olympics.
Yeah, a very bad Olympics. Hogan-esque Olympics, frankly. So if Mackenzie Arnold was Portland's plan to solve the issue of goalkeeping moving forward, I think this is not the solve Karina LeBlanc and co. think it is. Let's talk Courtney Vine.
We've talked about her on the show. This is a home run, especially because Caroline is back in 2024, which none of us saw coming.
Mm-hmm.
Like,
yeah, this is just a really nice depth piece, and it's a flyer on an attacker who is not 33, who is 26. Great age to sign an attacker.
I'm not sure she's a depth piece. I think she has to go into the 11. You compare her to like what Haley Hopkins has been doing.
Fair.
You know, I think Vine and Caroline on either wing, with Sanchez moving Lucy in the middle, or with Sanchez being able to like crash the box from underneath, is going to give North Carolina an elite attacking unit right out of the box, which they have not had at all in any way, shape, or form.
Yeah.
Like,
I mean, North Carolina has been sitting for me all season as the 6th best team in this league. This moves the needle a little bit for me. I of course have questions about like how much of what she was able to create in Australia can translate to the NWSL. But honestly, athletically, I like the profile a lot. And with the addition of Caroline coming back, even if Courtney Vine isn't a huge hit, North Carolina just got a lot better. They just did.
I think she has a good chance of hitting because Vine loves playing in transition. Her physicality is well tested based on like what happens in the A-League. So, you know, if you look at whatever she did in the Olympics, I think you can chalk that up to Tony Gustafsson just like losing his mind and just not putting his best players out on the field. I think she's got a really good chance, especially with the way that North Carolina like to play with Ashley Sanchez breaking in space.
It's Nahas ball that gives me pause with Courtney Vine.
But also, it's the one thing that Nahas ball really needs is pace in behind, you know?
It's counterpoint. It offers them attacking counterpoint to what they sort of do primarily. And how much Nahas like views that as like a wonderful compliment piece is how much mileage I expect North Carolina to get out of this signing. Suddenly North Carolina is like a shitty out if you're drawn against them in the playoffs.
If you are not a member of our Patreon subscription tier, go on over to patreon.com/xowngoals. That's the letter X own goals, and sign up today for only $6 a month. You'll get all of our bonus episodes, as well as access to our Discord server and our monthly-ish live stream watch-alongs that we're going to be doing for the rest of the regular season and the playoffs. So
our when it counts live stream watch.
That's right. That's exactly how we are going to be handling it. So, and it's $6 a month. It's a pretty good deal. Follow us on social media at XOwnGoals. That's the letter X own goals. If you believe we've made an own goal, email us at expectedowngoals@gmail.com. That's the letter expectedowngoals@gmail.com. And we will be back next week to truly get back into our groove and recap the weekend's action in the NWSL.
Let's go crazy.
All right,
Let's
talk soon.
go
Bye.
crazy.
Yay!